When I read the gospel just a minute ago, where did you locate yourself in the reading? As I read and reread the gospel this past week, I found myself standing at the sidelines, a bystander watching the exchange. There is something very disturbing and also very intimate about this gospel. It's a leper who has approached Jesus, and he is unclean. He is literally an untouchable. Leprosy was considered highly communicable, of course, but Jesus reaches out and touches the man. He chooses to touch the leper and make him well. The word translated from the Greek into English as touch is much more nuanced than that. There's really no good translation for it. This touch is a healing touch, a loving touch, a touch that communicates presence and receptivity, a touch that lets the leper know that while the rest of the world considers him untouchable and invisible, Jesus sees him and loves him. And then the secrets begin. In Mark, we see the least sophisticated Jesus of the four Gospels. Jesus is almost surprised when he touches people and they're healed. And here it has happened again with a leper whose status of uncleanliness has now been transferred to Jesus. I can imagine Jesus panicking a little bit and saying, "Shh, don't tell anyone what happened," thinking that he now has to remove himself from society because he is unclean. But the leper, whose life has been transformed from illness to health, from isolation from community to connection, can't stop himself from telling everyone. The leper is the first evangelist. We human beings are made for connection. The leper, when he is healed, immediately seeks that connection through the telling of his story of healing. Illness or ill health in whatever form is what keeps us literally out of touch, away from connection with others. In the leper, this lack of connection was because of the communicable nature of his illness, which rendered him unclean. For most of us who are in good physical health, what separates us from others is less obvious and more at the level of the health of our soul. Hurts, grievances, and grudges, cut-offs and anger, gossip, envy, disdain, shame, fear, and guilt. There are so many ways we can be compelled to choose to live in isolation, separation, rather than risking and choosing to reach out, to ask for connection, and to offer that connection to someone else. We first hear of the leper as he is approaching Jesus for healing, but we don't get the backstory on his life. We don't hear about how long he had suffered, how painful the isolation had been for him. We don't know how he survived, how he comforted himself, how he found meaning in his life. In some ways, this gives us a very skewed perspective. We want for ourselves the instant healing that we hear in today's gospel. But not all healing comes in this way. Sometimes, in order to heal, we must stay with the pain. Sometimes healing comes when circumstances force us to meet up with ourselves head-on with perfect and direct honesty. Richard Rohr, Roman Catholic Franciscan friar and priest, wrote a book called Everything Belongs. And it's a book I've read several times over the past 10 years, and I was rereading part of it this past week and came across a passage which speaks so well to this idea of healing. He says, "Because we are offered so many things that are immediately satisfying, albeit in a superficial way, it is hard to remain spiritually hungry. We give answers too quickly, take away pain too easily, and too commonly stimulate ourselves with nonsense. In terms of soul work, we dare not get rid of pain before we have learned what it has to teach us. We must be taught how to stay with the pain of life, without answers, without conclusions, and some days without meaning. That is the path, the perilous, dark path of true prayer. And why wouldn't we want our pain taken away? Is there anyone among us that does not wish that for ourselves? Jesus did. If you remember, at the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed for God to take this cup from him, meaning to take away his sentence of torture and death. But then he prayed, "Not my will, but yours." Often we interpret this passage as God willing the bloody torture and death of Jesus, of his Son, as the way of forgiving our sins. However, maybe what's really happening is God willing life and resurrection. God doesn't make things happen. God does not require the death of his Son. But God took what we did, the bloody torture and death of Jesus, and brought life out of it. The same is true for the leper. God took the leper's illness and brought life out of it. And the same is true for us. God takes whatever is broken in us, whatever keeps us in isolation and separate from each other, from love, and brings life to us through it. I'm going to read this gospel one more time. And instead of being a bystander in the story, I invite you to take the role of leper. What is it in you that keeps you separate from others, that keeps you separate from love? Offer that to God for healing, because while God does not willingly inflict suffering on anyone, it is only God who has the power to bring us life. A reading from the Gospel of Mark. A leper came to Jesus begging him, and kneeling he said to him, "If you choose, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, and said to him, "I do choose, be made clean." Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. After sternly warning him, he sent him away at once, saying to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded, as a testimony to them." But he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the word, so that Jesus could no longer go into a town openly, but stayed out in the country, and people came to him from every quarter.